People who have gone out for a pack of cigarettes and never run back to their families. What happened after you left? My dad passed away when I was pretty young. My mom eventually remarried a pretty cool guy when I was young. It was honestly an amazing dad. When my mom got sick when I was in middle school, he was absolutely incredible, taking care of everyone and reaffirming that I was his son. When my mom passed, it was just me and him for a few years, and there were some amazing times. He made sure I was seeing a counselor and we did family things in the weekend. Our friends used to joke that he wasn't even my biological dad, but he still made more time for me and did more things for me than their biological dads did. When I was nearing high school, he got remarried. I didn't exactly like my new stepmom, but didn't hate her. I think I just thought the relationship wouldn't last and he'd move on to someone better. Then they got married, and it was kind of weird. I did get an amazing baby brother from that, not all bad. My stepdad passed away because of an undiagnosed severe allergy. My stepmom got me from school and drove me to the hospital, and when my dad was gone, she handed me my baby brother and said she needed a minute by herself. I never saw her again. She was much younger than my dad and was an ex-foster care kid with no family or best friends to support her. And I think she looked at her newborn baby and the kid her husband inherited and just couldn't handle it. I sure know I wasn't prepared to handle it. But my mom and my biological dad had been ex-foster care kids, and Mom told me a few stories, so I wasn't going to let that happen to me or my brother. I do sometimes feel a little resentful that I can't have a normal life. I'm working too much and I have a kid to figure out how to get into college, but I don't want my family to just be in cycles of poverty and hopeless jobs. Anyway, I have full custody. My stepdad adopted me when my mom passed, so for all intents and purposes, my brother is legally my brother. I want to adopt him, and there's a court case or two that I don't want to compromise just in case. Movies have told me that anyway. Stepmom will probably be charged with abandonment when she can be located, but so far we haven't heard anything. I've always been worried that she had a mental health break and something snapped. Abandonment didn't really fit what I knew of her, and I remember that she had some kind of mental health problem. It's not like we talked about it, though. She could have gone off her medication into chaos. I'm more worried than angry, but my first concern will always be for my favorite little tyke. We're doing pretty well. We have a support worker who has been fantastic, helping us get access to free and reduced cost services. I'm also pretty thrifty. I YouTubed how to knit socks and fix clothing, and thrift stores are great. I don't live near a major city, and so it's not as expensive as it could have been. Being frugal also helps. There's usually always good stuff out there if you know how to ask for help. And my dad always told me the hardest thing, but the most important thing to do is suck up your pride and ask for help. I'm getting better about that, but it's hard. My dad making me do therapy helped a bunch to admit when I needed help. He said that needing help wasn't about not being capable, but being smart. If you're carrying an expensive TV, you could carry it by yourself, but you're smarter if you grab a friend. I'm almost finished with an apprenticeship right now, and I'm in a union that's decent enough that wives used to drop off casseroles and leave cribs and stuff on our porch. Everyone should be involved in their community. I wouldn't have survived without everyone willing to go to bat for me. I'm working pretty hard because I'm incredibly fortunate to have met good people along the way. I owe them a lot. I also work part-time at a nursery, helping with plants and stuff on weekends for the staff discount and free stuff. I've taken home more than a few fruit trees and vegetable seedlings. The more I work, the more I can throw into savings. It's morbid, but I want to make sure that if I pass, he's not frantically worrying about paying for that. It's not exactly a good feeling. My brother and I have been working on expanding our tiny garden to try and offset the cost of food, and he seems to like gardening just as much as my dad did. Last year, we didn't buy a single potato or any herbs. It's been the best, low-cost, high-involved activity we're doing, and it sometimes makes me feel less guilty that I can't be there more for him like our dad was for me. We have glass pasta jars and tin cans growing basil and rosemary right now. I told my brother if he can keep them alive all year without me needing to intervene, we can look at adopting chickens. He specifically wants 2 chickens named Chick Ken and Chick Barbie, because he's funnier than I am. I'm working a bunch now because I want him to be in a better position in the future. My dad left a small but decent amount in a trust, and I pulled from it when I first got custody when I was scrambling to afford everything. I want to replace everything I took and also make sure he can afford to do the things that I couldn't when I was growing up. When he's in high school and wants to celebrate by going to Mexico, then he's going to Mexico. I do miss the stuff I can't do. I've never not had responsibilities. I'm still friends with people from school and they're doing cross-country adventures and dropping money on expensive stuff. It's such a weird idea that they can just go to music festivals without worrying about anything. While I'm trying to find a detergent that doesn't set the bro's allergy off. I wouldn't trade him for the world, though. We have savings accounts and insurance policies, and I'm probably better off than a lot of people. The comments have been incredible, with people offering help from everywhere. I needed that help when I was in high school and scared out of my absolute mind. I'm almost 24 now, and I'm stable, but paranoid and weird for sure. If you'd like to donate, please direct them to local organizations fighting the good fight. The difficult part of the story is basically over. Until he hits his teenage years, probably. God knows how I'm going to handle that. That's a problem for my future self. I don't need that kind of help anymore, and I'm moving into the phase of life where I just want to give back to people who have helped me by passing it on. Today you, tomorrow me. That's my philosophy in life. There are a lot of people out there like me, and they deserve to be able to grow garlic in old jam jars with our family just as much as I did. Major props to this dude. He's responsible, he got to pull himself together despite all that. Yeah, not a lot of people can do that. Story 2. My mom just suddenly wasn't there anymore. She and my dad were miserable, but my dad wouldn't agree to divorce. He was a minister at a big church and didn't believe divorce was right. Instead, he tried to stay married to my mom, all while avoiding her and all the unhappiness at home. She never really left her bedroom. She was miserable, and she made everyone else miserable too. She was horrible to me in those last few years. We'd been really close before that. She started moving stuff out of the house little by little when no one was home. Like, one day a bookshelf would be gone and we'd all notice but just kind of go on with our lives. It bothers me very much, but her moving out was so abrupt and ambiguous that I don't remember specifics about it. Like, I don't know if it was during the school year or over the summer. I don't know where I was or what was different when I came home that day, but at some point she didn't live there anymore. My dad told me that God told him she would never come back. I looked up to my dad a lot. He was kind of on the same level as God in my mind, so I believed him. He soon after started dating another woman, secretly, because the church didn't know he was divorced yet. He intended to marry her as soon as possible. I remember I had to pose for family photos with this new woman and her 2 kids. They were printed up, put into frame, and hung over our fireplace. Then one day, my mom came to the house. She told me she had made the biggest mistake of her life, that she loved me, my brother, and my dad. She wanted to work everything out. I guess God was wrong when he spoke to my dad. Then she walked out of my room and saw the new family portrait over the fireplace. She left quickly. A few days later, she called the house. My dad answered, and she told him to tell the kids I said goodbye. Then she hung up. We started calling everyone we could think of. We tried to call the phone operator, asking if they could trace the call. This was 1995, so there was no caller ID or cell phone with a callback number. A bit later that night, my new stepmom-to-be came over and pulled my dad aside. She saw a car at the end of our neighborhood that looked like my mom's. My dad called 911. Everyone showed up. They took my mom to the ER and told my dad to call my brother so he could come say his goodbyes too. I was let into the room for a while. I looked at the machines and they were plugged into the wall, and I stared for a long time. I couldn't understand why we were doing all this because my mom would have wanted none of it. But then a nurse came in and said I had to leave while they did stuff. My mom survived. My dad married the other lady. I think this messed me up, and I honestly can't believe I've had this entire recollection. I don't think about it very often, and maybe that's why I can't remember the details of the day I realized she'd moved out. Story 3. Everything was going well, but we were young and both were our first partners. I came home early one day to find my wife with another man. Standard insanity ensued, followed by her begging for forgiveness, and we went through months of counseling. Everything seemed well and dandy. She seemed like a totally different woman and couldn't live without me. One day I logged into her desktop PC, and her Facebook was loaded with multiple messages. I had to look. I found exactly what I knew I would find. It crushed me, but I acted like nothing had happened. That weekend I picked up my favorite clothes and belongings that meant a lot to me and snuck them into the car. Sunday evening, I said, "Hey, I'm going to take the dogs to the dog park and hike for a few hours." When I left, I texted our neighbor to see if anyone showed up at the house. She replied that a male visitor had come and gone very quickly. I told her goodbye and the dogs, and I just drove. I had decent savings and thought, screw it, start off somewhere new. And that is what I did. My ex-wife didn't even try to contact me until around lunchtime the next day. When I didn't respond, she sent me messed up photos, videos, and rants about how bad I was. It destroyed me. But I just kept trucking. I ended up in a smaller town where I saw someone was hiring for my trade. Years later, I remarried to the best human ever. I went home not long ago, and my mom posted a picture of us at a gathering. My ex hit up my Facebook and asked if we could meet up for a cup of coffee. She would like some closure, which I obviously would like as well. I have to say, for all the resentment and hatred I had towards this woman, our conversation was pleasant, and I felt better after we talked. She understood why I left, she apologized deeply, many times, and didn't try to blame me for anything. After an hour and a little bit of crying, awkward as hell in public, she asked if it was okay to get a hug. We hugged and said our goodbyes. Once I got home, I told my wife about the visit, and she got awkward for a few minutes. She left the room, and I didn't follow. I thought, oh, I'm sleeping on the couch tonight. 5 minutes later, she came back crying and just gave me the biggest hug ever. She told me she forgot what I went through, and she was sorry and glad our lives were good. In closing, I left a terrible human for the best human ever.
That was gripping. I'm glad he knew his breaking point and mustered the strength to leave. If you made it this far, don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you haven't already. More of these serious talks are on the way. Story 4. Growing up, my mother was pretty cruel, mostly emotionally, to me and my little sister. This included basically fabricating a false reality. She claimed that my dad had divorced my mother and left her penniless, then left the state. Additionally, she isolated us from the other family members on the basis that they were bad people. Probably the worst thing she did, which I still deal with today, was turn me and my little sister against each other in these messed up scenarios. Basically, her substance-induced rage of the day would always fall on one of us. However, whoever told on the other sibling that they did something to anger my mother would face her wrath, and the other sibling would have a brief respite. This went on since I was little, and I grew up hating my sister. After I got older, I found my best friend in high school, and he helped me understand just how messed up my situation was. Given that I assumed that's how family life was since we were so isolated. No TV or internet. Also, my mother was a teacher at both my elementary and middle school. She had control over everything. When I became of legal age, I left my house and moved in with my friend. However, it wasn't forever. It was joining the army at the end of school, and I had to think of someone to stay with. So I found my dad, who was away, and I took a long shot and asked him if I could stay with him. He accepted. I got everything I owned in the world, which fit in a truck bed, and while most kids were going off to college, I was going to start over in a completely different place with a father I didn't know. It turned out my dad was a decent guy. He wasn't a saint by any means, but he was leagues better than my mother. He helped me get a driver's license and eventually helped me join the military, where I've just finished my first year. Haven't seen my little sister in 2 years, though. And she still hates me, even though she's an adult too and she hasn't left her mother, and since I left, she's become closer with her. I regret not trying harder to be there for her every day. But as for my life now, I have 3 years left in the military, and then I hope to go to college and become a pilot, none of which I ever thought of when I was living under my mother's roof. Don't worry, one day her sister will realize just how messed up of a situation she's in, and hopefully she'll leave too. Story 5. My ex-husband was physically and emotionally cruel due to his unhealthy habits. He obsessively controlled the money and every second of my daily routine. An unplanned 5-minute delay to get gas on the way home would result in a reprimand, if I was lucky, or roughing up if I wasn't. We had 3 daughters, and on the few occasions I threatened to leave, he'd tell me to go ahead and leave, but I couldn't take our daughters with me. At one of our couple's friends' wedding receptions, he got tipsy as per usual and lost his mind over something insignificant in front of the wedding party. One of his friends, who was really crappy, took me aside while the groom's mom was driving my ex home and told me, "You don't have to live like this." It was like a light went on my head. This guy says I don't have to live like this? It took me a couple of weeks to put a plan in place, but one morning after my ex left for work, my dad helped me pack everything that would fit in the U-Haul, and I got out. I'd like to say I never saw him again after that day, but I was pretty lucky he decided to leave me alone after an initial period of stalking and a bout in jail for violating an order of protection. Fast forward 15 years, and I finished undergrad, law school, and a postdoc. I'm remarried with 2 more amazing kids. Life is pretty much a goal. Story 6. My real dad ghosted like 4 families. In his first family, he had a son. He was in that family for 13 years. His son had a motorcycle incident and ended up in intensive care. A year later, he ghosted that family and moved to a new state. Just up and left. It didn't take anything but his clothes and his car. In his second family, he had a daughter. He left almost immediately. Then he moved to another state, married another woman, and had 2 more kids whom I never met or spoken to. I don't even know their names, to be honest. Jake, John, Jordan, and Josh. Something with a J. He went out for a pack of cigarettes and never went back. His own words. Then he met my mom and had my sister first. He ghosted my mom 3 years and 2 months later, then showed up again and I happened. He ghosted her, but she didn't leave the state. She called the cops, and my first memories of the cops bringing my dad to the house and letting him go, only for him to go after my mom while she was holding me. Then the cops arrested him. He wanted out, so he got out. He had 2 more marriages, but no kids. It's his MO to be with well-off women and mooch until they either kick him out or he gets bored. It's really painful to see because I want to be an awful dad who's there for his kids every freaking second of their lives. I want to be the exact opposite of him. Don't we all just have daddy issues? Story 7. I still regret not being able to say goodbye to my sister 12 years ago. I said goodbye to my brother and my mom, but I was the only one who knew I would never come back. I moved 300 miles away. I've seen my brother and my mom twice since then, but I haven't seen my sister since I put her down for her nap that day, before I knew I was leaving. After I left, my mom got married. My sister went to live with her grandparents, and my brother chose to be homeless rather than let her mom drag him around different cities in the middle of a school year. I was able to finish school, which wouldn't have happened if I stayed. I stopped trying to do stupid things and started eating healthily. I was basically blackmailed into seeing my mom after 6 years while my ex pretended we were together. I finally found a family that actually liked me and met my boyfriend, whom I've been friends with for 8 years and together with for 4 years. I got my own cat and now have my own apartment, with bills paid early. Overall, it has been great, in between my mom popping into my life. Story 8. When I was young, I moved away from my cruel father. I was commuting to college at the time and I had morning classes, so the night before I packed my car with as much of my stuff as I could and set off. One of my professors, whom I regularly talked to after class, noticed that my car was full of clothes and asked if everything was okay. Over lunch, I explained my situation and he offered to take me in. Although I had already made arrangements to live with my mother, I accepted his offer. After my classes for the day were over, I went home for the first time since I was a child to live with my mother. I slept on the couch for months before getting my own bed. We didn't always have the money to eat, but we made it work. I've seen my father one time since then because he swore to me that he had changed. That night, he proceeded to drink and then try to do something horrible to me. I haven't seen him since and have no regrets. Story 9. I hadn't started a family of my own yet, but I was engaged to my ex, whom I ended up ghosting after a few years. It was several years ago, and he had to move back to Tokyo for his job. We met in the US while he was an expat, so he asked me to come live with him. I moved, met the family, and all that stuff. But one day I came down with the flu and was miserable and so weak that I couldn't even walk myself to the bathroom. He tried to come on to me several times that day, and I kept refusing because of obvious reasons. He did it again that night. So I pretended to be asleep until he left for work the next morning, packed my stuff, and left. I dropped the key off at the concierge and hurried out of that building in a huge panic. I never spoke to him again and cut off all contact immediately. I booked hotels for a couple of weeks and met my now husband. Yep, some families really are complicated, and sadly, people just reach a point of no return. Have you been in the same shoes? Check out People Have Cut Their Families Off. What Was the Last Straw? And see if it sparks a memory of your own. Story 1 is heartbreaking. See you there.